One hot afternoon, when the sun stood still above the rusted roofs of Adebayo Street, a long line of black vehicles rolled slowly into the compound where the poorest families in town lived. Children stopped playing. Women paused in the middle of washing clothes. Even the old men sitting under the mango tree rose halfway from their benches. The vehicles were too polished, too expensive, too important for that place. Dust lifted behind them as they came to a stop in front of a cracked one-room apartment with a broken blue door. Then, two stern-looking men stepped out. They wore black suits, dark glasses, polished shoes. And without greeting anyone, one of them asked in a deep voice, "Is this where Amara lives?" At once, whispers spread through the compound. Amara? The fruit seller? What does a girl like that have to do with men like these? Nobody understood what was happening, because just a few days earlier, Amara had been struggling to feed herself. Just a few days earlier, she had lost the only work she had. And just a few days earlier, she had given away the last of her savings to help a blind old man everybody else ignored. How did a poor market girl become the reason a royal convoy came to a forgotten compound? To understand that, we must go back to the beginning. Amara's mornings always began before sunrise, long before the call of the first trader, long before the market buses started growling on the road, long before most people turned on their lanterns. She would wake in darkness, sit quietly on her thin mat, and listen to the sound of her little brother David breathing beside her. If he was still asleep, she would smile, because for Amara, peace never lasted long. Their room was small. The roof leaked when it rained. The window had no shutters, and the walls carried the tired smell of years of poverty. But every morning, Amara would rise like somebody who still believed tomorrow could be better. She would fetch water, warm yesterday's leftover porridge, wake David for school, and tie her faded wrapper with the determination of someone who had no choice but to survive. David was only 12, bright, quiet, and painfully aware of how hard his sister worked. Sometimes while eating, he would look up at her and say, "One day I will become somebody. You will rest, Amara, I promise." And Amara would laugh softly, touching his head. "First pass your exams," she would say. "Then you can start making promises." But behind that smile was a burden she never spoke aloud. School fees were due in 3 weeks. She had been saving every small note she could hide inside an old biscuit tin under her mat. Not for clothes, not for herself, not for beauty, not for comfort, but for David's school fees. Because in her heart, she had decided long ago that even if poverty swallowed her life, it would not swallow his. After sending him off to school, Amara would walk to Oja Central Market, where she worked under a woman everybody feared. Her name was Madame Sade. Madame Sade owned one of the biggest fruit stalls in the market. Her voice was sharp. Her temper was worse. And her heart, many people said, was made of stone. Still, people worked for her because she paid better than most traders. Not well, just better. And when survival is chasing you, better is enough reason to endure almost anything. "Amara!" Madame Sade shouted the moment she arrived that morning. "Why are you moving like a bride on her wedding day? Arrange those oranges, and don't let me repeat myself." "Yes, Ma," Amara replied quickly. She tied her apron and got to work. The market was already alive. Voices clashed from every direction. Tomatoes, pepper, yam, fish, palm oil. People called out prices like they were fighting a war of lungs. Women argued. Babies cried. Wheelbarrows squeaked. And under the middle heat of the morning, sweat sat on every forehead like a second skin. Amara moved with speed and discipline. She arranged pineapples, carried baskets, smiled at customers, counted change, apologized when pushed, and endured the biting remarks of Madame Sade without complaint. At the same stall worked another young woman named Kemi. Kemi had been there longer. She was beautiful, proud, and increasingly bitter. Before Amara arrived, customers used to praise Kemi for her politeness and neatness. But now many people preferred Amara. Not because she was prettier, not because she talked too much, but because kindness had a way of shining on her face, and people could feel it. Kemi hated that. She never said it plainly. She did not need to. It showed in the way she watched Amara, in the way her mouth tightened whenever a customer said, "This girl is well-mannered," in the way she whispered small poison into Madame Sade's ears. That afternoon, just when the sun was cruelest, a blind old man appeared near the stall. His clothes were worn thin. Dust covered his slippers. He held a wooden walking stick in one hand and an empty food bowl in the other. At first, nobody paid attention to him. He stood quietly, listening, waiting, perhaps hoping someone might notice his hunger without making him beg. But markets can be loud places for people with money, and invisible places for people without it. Some glanced at him and looked away. Others frowned, as if his poverty was an offense. The old man swallowed and took one careful step closer. "Please," he said weakly, "can anyone help me with something to eat?" One customer hissed in annoyance. Another waved him away. Then Madame Sade turned. The moment she saw him, anger covered her face. "What are you doing here?" she barked. "Do you want to chase my customers?" The old man lowered his head. "I am hungry, my daughter, even if it is just a little fruit." Before he could finish, Madame Sade grabbed a bowl of water that had been used to rinse the fruit knives. Without warning, she threw it straight at him. The dirty water splashed across his chest, his face, his blind eyes. The old man staggered. A few people gasped. A few laughed. Amara froze. Her hands stopped moving over the basket of mangoes. For 1 second, shame and anger rose inside her like fire. But fear held her still. She knew Madame Sade. Any protest would become an insult. Any insult would become dismissal. And dismissal would become disaster. "Get out!" Madame Sade shouted. "If I see you here again, I will call the task force." The old man said nothing. He simply stood there, dripping, humiliated, gripping his bowl. Then slowly he turned. As he moved away, he lifted his face slightly. Though his eyes looked cloudy and blind, Amara felt as if that old man had somehow looked straight into her heart. All day the scene followed her. Even when she answered customers, even when she counted coins, even when she swept the stall. She kept seeing the dirty water on his face. She kept hearing the weakness in his voice. And more than anything, she kept hearing her own silence. That evening, after the market closed, Amara walked home with a bag containing 2 small tomatoes, pepper, and a fistful of Gary. She was tired, hungry, and ashamed of herself. As she turned past the old pharmacy at the corner, she saw someone sitting by the roadside wall. It was the old man. He sat with his back bent and his bowl empty. People passed him without slowing down. Amara stopped. Her fingers tightened around the little money tucked inside her wrapper. It was barely enough for supper. If she bought food for him, what would she and David eat? She walked 3 steps away, then stopped. Walked again. Stopped again. Inside her, a battle began. "You are already poor," one voice said. "Do not act like you have abundance." Another voice answered, "But hunger recognizes hunger." Amara closed her eyes briefly. Then she turned around. She went to a nearby food cellar and bought a small portion of rice and beans. Not enough for comfort, just enough to keep a person from sleeping on pain. When she handed it to the old man, her voice was gentle. "Please, Baba, take this." The old man lifted his face. "For me?" "Yes." He did not collect it immediately. "Why would you help me after what happened today?" Amara swallowed. "Because what happened was wrong." The old man took the food slowly. "May heaven remember you," he said. Amara gave a faint smile. "Please eat before it gets cold." She left quickly before he could say more. That night, she and David shared watered Gary in silence. David noticed. "You did not cook?" Amara smiled. "I was too tired." But deep inside, despite her hunger, there was peace. The next day at the market, she saw the old man again. Not near the stall, across the road, sitting under a neem tree, waiting, watching nothing, as though the world had forgotten him. At lunchtime, workers usually received a small meal from Madame Sade's kitchen corner. That day, when the food was served, Amara hesitated. Then she asked the cook in a low voice, "Mama Bose, please, can you pack mine separately?" The older woman frowned. "Separately? For what?" "It is for someone." Mama Bose stared at her, then shrugged. This girl and her secrets. She packed the food into a small plastic container. Amara hid it under the stall until Madame Sade became busy arguing over prices with a customer. Then she slipped out. Her heart beat hard as she crossed the road. The old man was still there. "Baba," she said softly. He turned toward the sound of her footsteps. "I brought you food." Again he looked surprised. Again he asked, "Why are you doing this?" Amara knelt slightly so her voice would carry better. "Because nobody should be left hungry if another person can help." The old man accepted the food. "What is your name, my daughter?" "Amara." He nodded slowly. "Amara, a good name." "And yours, Baba?" He paused. "Kabiru," he said at last. For the first time, Amara smiled properly. "Well, Baba Kabiru, eat well." That became their quiet routine. Day after day, she found a way to take him food. Sometimes from her own portion, sometimes by buying cheap bread on her way home, sometimes by giving him fruit that would have spoiled by the next day. And every time, Baba Kabiru would ask strange questions. "What do you want most in life? If help never returns to you, will you still give it? What hurts more, hunger or humiliation?" Amara would answer honestly, never knowing why those questions mattered. "What I want most," she once said, "is a life where my brother does not have to fear tomorrow." Another day she said, "If I wait for a reward before helping, then it is no longer kindness, it is trade." And on another evening, after a long silence, she said, Humiliation hurts deeper than hunger. Hunger can pass. Shame can stay inside a person for years. Every answer made the old man quiet for a while, as if he was storing her words somewhere important. Days passed. Then one afternoon, rain clouds gathered early. The air turned heavy, and when Amara found Baba Kabiru at his usual place, something was wrong. He was breathing too fast. His body trembled. Even in the heat, his hands were cold. "Baba?" she asked, fear entering her voice. "Are you sick?" He forced a weak smile. "It is nothing." But it was not nothing. Amara placed her hand on his forehead and drew back immediately. He was burning. "Have you taken medicine?" He shook his head. "Do you have money for it?" A bitter laugh escaped him. "Look at me, my daughter. Do I look like a man with money?" Amara stood still. In her mind, she saw the biscuit tin under her mat. David's school fees. 3 weeks of saving. Every coin counted twice. Every note folded carefully. She also saw this old man sitting before her, feverish and alone, with nobody to care whether he lived or died. She turned away for a moment. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Then she made her choice. "Wait here," she said. "Do not move." That evening she went home, opened the biscuit tin, and held the money in both hands. David saw her. "Why are you taking the fees money?" Amara sat beside him. She told him everything. He listened quietly, far older in spirit than his age. When she finished, the room was silent. Then David said softly, "If you don't help him, you will keep thinking about it." Amara looked at him. "But your fees—" "We will find another way," he said. "You always say God sees everything. Maybe this is one of those times." Amara hugged him tightly. The next morning, before going to the market, she met Baba Kabiru and helped him to a small clinic. The nurse checked him and wrote down medicine. The amount was painful. Painful enough that Amara almost laughed from the cruelty of life. Still, she paid. Every last note. When the nurse handed over the medicine, Baba Kabiru turned toward her. "You used money meant for something important," he said quietly. Amara was startled. "How did you know?" "Your silence told me." She said nothing. He spoke again. "You should not sacrifice your future for an old stranger." Amara shook her head. "A future that demands I ignore someone dying in front of me is not the kind of future I want." For the first time, the old man's lips trembled, as though emotion had reached somewhere deep inside him. "May your path open," he whispered. But kindness does not move unseen in places where jealousy is awake. Kemi had begun to suspect something. She noticed Amara packing food separately. She noticed her slipping away at lunch. She noticed the softness on her face when she returned. And jealousy, once it grows teeth, begins to hunt. One afternoon, Kemi followed her. Hiding between parked vans and market umbrellas, she watched Amara hand fruit and medicine to Baba Kabiru. Then quietly, Kemi took pictures with her phone. Her smile that day was the smile of someone who had found a weapon. When they returned to the stall, Kemi waited until Madame Sade was in a terrible mood. Then she stepped close and whispered. Madame Sade's face changed at once. "Amara!" she thundered. The entire stall turned silent. Customers looked over. "What have you been doing with my food?" Amara's heart dropped. "Ma?" "Do not pretend. This girl says you have been taking items from my stall to feed some useless blind beggar." Amara shook her head quickly. Ma, it was my own food, my lunch. Your lunch from where? Madame Sade shouted. From my business. People gathered. Shame rose like hot smoke around Amara. Kemi stood behind Madame Sade with false innocence in her eyes. I even have proof, Ma, she said, showing the pictures. Madame Sade grabbed the phone. Her mouth tightened. How dare you, she hissed. So you want to act wholly with my property? Ma, please, Amara begged. I only wanted to help him. Then help him with unemployment. Before Amara could speak again, Madame Sade pushed a basket off the stall. Oranges rolled everywhere. Get out. Do not let me see you here tomorrow. Ma, please, I need this work. My brother's school. Out! The market watched. No one intervened. That was how Amara lost her job. Not for stealing gold, not for laziness, not for dishonesty, but for feeding a blind old man. She walked home carrying her apron in one hand and heartbreak in the other. That night, rain fell hard. The roof leaked in 3 places. David used bowls to catch the water, while Amara sat on the mat staring into darkness. I am sorry, she said at last. For what? David asked. For failing us. He moved closer. You did not fail us. But Amara felt otherwise. No job, no fees, no savings, and no way forward. The next morning she went looking for Baba Kabiru, hoping at least to tell him what had happened. But he was gone. Not under the neem tree, not by the roadside wall, not near the clinic, not anywhere. It was as if he had vanished from the earth. Days turned into one another. Amara searched for work. Everywhere she went, the answer was the same. Come back later. We are not hiring. Do you have experience? She sold 2 of her dresses, borrowed rice from a neighbor, promised David she would solve the fee problem somehow. Inside, she was breaking. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. The same kind of black vehicles that powerful people used rolled into her compound. The same 2 suited men stepped out, and the whole place held its breath. When Amara entered the compound, carrying a small nylon bag of charcoal, one of the men stepped forward. Are you Amara, daughter of the late Chika and Ngozi? She stopped. Yes. Our master requests your presence. Amara frowned. Your master? The second man opened an envelope and handed it to her. Inside was a thick cream card embossed with a royal seal. She did not understand the words at first. Her hands trembled slightly. One of the men spoke. You are invited to Afolayan House. Her heartbeat changed. Everybody in that region knew the name. Afolayan House was not just wealth. It was history, influence, old power. A place people spoke of in lowered voices. Amara looked from the card to the men. I think there is a mistake. There is no mistake, the man replied calmly. Our master has asked specifically for you. The neighbors were now fully gathered. Whispers moved like fire through dry grass. What did she do? Is she in trouble? Has she offended someone important? David rushed forward from inside the room. Amara? She looked at him. Fear battled with curiosity. What if I don't go? She asked. The men exchanged a glance. Our master said you would be free to refuse, one replied. But he believes you deserve the truth. The truth. That phrase struck her deeply. After a long pause, Amara turned to David. I will go and come back. His eyes were worried. Should I come with you? She shook her head. Stay with Mama and Ketchy next door until I return. She went inside, changed into her neatest dress, though it was still simple and faded, and returned to the waiting convoy. When she stepped into the vehicle, she felt as though she was stepping out of one life and toward another she could not yet name. The drive was long enough for fear to grow. The city thinned. The roads widened. The houses became larger. Then gates appeared. Tall, carved, guarded gates. The convoy slowed before one of them. Men in uniforms saluted as the gates opened. Inside was a vast estate of trimmed hedges, fountains, stone paths, and buildings that carried the quiet confidence of old wealth. Amara stared out the window, unable to hide her shock. The vehicle stopped at the foot of a grand staircase. The suited men led her inside. Hallways stretched wide and polished. Portraits lined the walls. Servants moved silently. Finally, they entered a large chamber with carved wooden pillars and high windows. At the far end of the room sat a man in a flowing robe. Strong, composed, dignified. For a second, Amara did not recognize him. Then he removed the dark glasses from his face, and her breath caught. It was Baba Kabiru, or rather, the man she knew as Baba Kabiru. But he was no blind beggar. There was no weakness in him now, no trembling hands, no poverty, only authority. Amara stepped back in disbelief. You? The man rose slowly. Yes, Amara. Her eyes widened. You are not blind. No. You are not poor. No. Her voice shook. Then who are you? The room fell silent before he answered. Narrate this as a single-voice cinematic storyteller in James' voice. Slightly fast, smooth-flowing, and with minimal pauses. My name is Chief Adetola Afalayan, custodian of the Afalayan Foundation and head of this household. Amara stared at him. The world seemed to tilt. All the days by the roadside, all the food, all the medicine, all the questions. Nothing made sense. You deceived me, she whispered. Pain touched the chief's face. Yes, he said quietly. And for that, I owe you an apology. Amara's chest rose and fell. I do not understand any of this. Chief Adetola motioned gently toward a seat. Please, sit. Let me explain. She remained standing for a moment, but eventually lowered herself onto the edge of a chair. The chief sat opposite her. Years seemed to gather in his voice when he spoke again. My daughter, the late Princess Marayo, built a food trust before she died. Her dream was simple. That no child in this region should sleep hungry if we had the means to help. After her death, many people came around me claiming they wanted to continue her work. But I watched them. Most wanted access to money, influence, status, not service. He paused. So I chose another path. I went out in disguise, pretending to be helpless. I wanted to see how ordinary people would treat someone who appeared to have no value. Amara listened in stunned silence. I visited many places, he continued. Church gates, motor parks, markets, rich neighborhoods, poor streets. I met people with soft words and hard hearts. I met people who gave for attention and withdrew when no one praised them. I met people who pitied, but would not sacrifice. Then he looked directly at her. And then I met you. Amara lowered her eyes. Chief Adetola's voice softened. You fed me when you had little. You defended my dignity without announcing it to the world. You spent money meant for your brother's school fees to buy medicine for a man you believed could never repay you. And even after losing your work, you still came looking for me. Tears gathered in Amara's eyes. She did not wipe them. The chief continued. I was not searching for a servant. I was not searching for a show of charity. I was searching for someone worthy to carry my daughter's dream. Amara looked up slowly. He leaned forward. I want you to lead the Marayo Community Kitchens initiative. She blinked, thinking she had misheard. What? The chief nodded. The foundation currently feeds 4 communities. Under proper leadership, it can feed 20. I want it rebuilt around compassion, honesty, and dignity. You have those things. Amara shook her head almost immediately.
No, sir. I am just a market girl. I did not finish university. I do not know anything about foundations.
Chief Adetola gave a faint smile. Knowledge can be taught. Character cannot. She said nothing. He continued. You will be trained, educated, supported, not used. If you accept, your brother's education will be fully sponsored from this day onward. Your housing problem will be solved, and you will work directly under the Foundation's development office. Amara covered her mouth with trembling fingers. It was too much, too sudden, too impossible.
Why would you do all this for me?
She whispered. The chief's answer came without hesitation. Because the poor are often tested by hardship, but the human soul is tested by power. You passed a test of the soul. Amara bowed her head and cried silently. Not loud tears, not dramatic tears, but the kind that come when a person has carried pain alone for too long and suddenly finds that heaven has not forgotten. After a while, the chief spoke again. There is one more thing. She looked up. My grandson, Tunde Afolayan, has just returned from Johannesburg. He manages our agricultural and logistics arm. If you accept this role, you will work closely with him in building the food network. Amara nodded faintly, still overwhelmed. The chief rose. Take your time. No one will force you. But whether you accept the position or not, your brother's fees will be paid. That is not a reward. It is a correction to a world that has been unfair to you. At that, Amara could no longer hold back. She slid from the chair onto her knees.
Thank you, sir.
Chief Adetola immediately stepped forward. No. Stand up, child. Do not kneel before me for doing what should have been done long ago. He helped her to her feet himself. For someone who had been treated like nothing days before, that simple act felt almost too holy to bear. Within 1 week, David's school fees were paid in full. A small team repaired the leaking roof in Amara's room, and Amara began training at the foundation. It was not easy. The office world frightened her at first. Files, meetings, budgets, maps, supply records, distribution plans. Everything seemed bigger than her old life. But she learned. She asked questions without shame. She listened, observed, remembered. And slowly, the same discipline that once helped her survive the market began helping her grow in a new world. That was when she met Tunde. He was nothing like the arrogant sons of wealthy homes people often described. He was calm, focused, and almost surprisingly respectful. The first time they met, he did not look at her with pity. He did not look at her with superiority. He simply extended his hand and said, "My grandfather does not trust easily. If he trusts you, then I want to know the person he saw. Amara shook his hand carefully. And if he is wrong? Tunde smiled slightly. Then I suppose I will find out. Their early days working together were formal. He taught her how supply routes worked, how one delayed truck could affect 2 villages, how dishonest middlemen stole from hunger itself, how systems, when guided by greedy hearts, could make charity cruel. Amara, in turn, taught him things numbers could not teach. That food should never be handed to the poor with contempt. That women waiting in line notice tone before quantity. That children remember whether the hand that feeds them is warm or impatient. That dignity is part of nourishment. Tunde listened more than he spoke, and gradually, a quiet respect grew between them. Months later, when the new kitchen program launched in 3 struggling areas, Amara stood before a crowd with a microphone in her hand. She was terrified. But she remembered the blind old man by the road. She remembered humiliation. She remembered empty bowls. And suddenly, the words came. No one should be made to feel small because they are hungry, she said. If food reaches the stomach but shame enters the heart, then we have not truly helped. The crowd applauded. Chief Adetola, watching from the front row, closed his eyes briefly, as if speaking to the memory of his daughter. The Marayo community kitchens began changing lives. Meals were served in schools. Widows were added to monthly support lists. Farm produce was bought from local women instead of middlemen. And in every center, one instruction was written clearly on the wall. Serve with dignity. But perhaps the sweetest moment came the day Amara returned to Oja Central Market. Not as a fruit seller, not as a desperate girl begging for work, but as the newly appointed coordinator opening a community feeding post beside the market square. When the banners were raised and officials arrived, people gathered quickly. And among those people were Madame Sade and Kemi. At first, they did not believe what they were seeing. Madame Sade pushed forward. Her eyes moved from the banner to the branded vans to Amara's face. Amara? She said, almost choking on the name. Amara turned. For a second, memory flashed between them. Dirty words, public shame, dismissal. But Amara's voice remained calm. Good morning, Ma. Madame Sade looked around nervously. They said you are in charge here. I am coordinating this center, yes. Kemi's face had gone pale. What happened? She asked before she could stop herself. Amara looked at her quietly, then said, Kindness happened. Neither woman knew where to place their eyes. That day, Madame Sade stood in a line with other traders to ask how market children could be registered for the weekend meal program. Amara helped her without mockery, without revenge, without spite. And that, perhaps, was the most shocking part of all. Because some victories are loud, but the deepest ones arrive with composure. As the months passed, Amara's work brought her even closer to Tunde. They traveled together to communities, sat through long planning meetings, shared quiet conversations after field visits. One evening, after opening a kitchen in a flood-hit village, they sat under a tree while the last transport truck was being loaded. The air smelled of wet earth. Children laughed in the distance. Tunde looked at her for a long moment before speaking. My grandfather says he found the right person for the foundation, he said. Amara smiled softly. He took a very strange route to get there. Tunde laughed. Yes, that sounds like him. A silence settled between them, but it was no longer awkward. Then Tunde asked, Do you ever regret helping him? Amara answered without thinking. No. Even after losing your job? She nodded. Yes, because if I had walked away, I would still have lost something. I would have lost myself. Tunde's eyes stayed on her, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. Do you know that is the first reason I admired you? Amara turned to him. The wind moved lightly through the leaves. What was the second reason? She asked before she could stop herself. A small smile touched his face. I am still gathering the words for that one. Amara looked away, but her smile remained. In time, the whole region came to know her name. Not because she married into wealth, not because scandal lifted her, not because luck fell from the sky, but because one poor market girl chose compassion when compassion was expensive. And that choice opened a door no strategy could have forced. 1 year after the convoy first came to her compound, a dedication ceremony was held for the largest Marayo kitchen yet. Chief Adetola stood before the crowd. His voice carried age, pride, and gratitude. Many people think greatness announces itself with power, he said. But often, greatness first appears as mercy in an ordinary place. We found ours in a market girl with little to give and a heart too noble to count the cost. Then he called Amara forward. The applause that rose that day seemed to carry every humiliation she had ever survived and turn it into honor. She stood before the crowd, not as the girl who once hid food in nylon bags, but as a woman who had become an answer to other people's hunger. And somewhere in that crowd stood David, taller now, better fed, school uniform neat, eyes shining with tears he did not try to hide. After the ceremony, he hugged her tightly. You told me to pass my exams first before making promises, he said. Amara laughed through tears. Yes? He smiled. I still plan to make you rest one day. She touched his cheek. You already helped me more than you know. That evening, as the sun lowered behind the new kitchen building, Chief Adetola stood beside a framed portrait of his late daughter, Marayo. He looked at Amara and said softly, Now her dream has found hands that will not betray it. Amara bowed her head. No, sir, she replied. It found a hungry girl who understood what food truly means. And perhaps that was the real miracle of the story. Not the convoy, not the estate, not the title, not even the transformation, but the fact that kindness, when it is real, does not merely help one person. It multiplies. It repairs roofs. It educates children. It restores dignity. It exposes cruelty. It builds futures. And it often returns from directions no one could ever predict. So if the world has ever made you feel that your small sacrifice means nothing, remember Amara. Remember that she gave away food she could barely spare. Remember that she spent school fees on medicine for a man she thought would never repay her. Remember that she was mocked, betrayed, and cast aside. And still, her goodness did not die. Because what is done from a pure heart may be delayed. It may be tested. It may even seem wasted. But one day, in one form or another, it finds its way home. And as for Amara and Tunde, that, perhaps, is a story for another day. Maybe a story of partnership. Maybe a story of love. Maybe a story of two people who first met through service and later discovered that some hearts were always meant to walk the same road. But whether that chapter began in friendship or something deeper, one truth remained unchanged. The day Amara fed a blind old man, she thought she was saving one hungry stranger. She had no idea that the same act would one day feed whole communities. And that is how a poor market girl became the answer to a royal promise.